The legislative session in Nevada started on February 3rd and ended on June 2nd. And there's a whole bunch that happened in that time that is going to be impacting tourists, current locals, and future locals alike with the laws that we saw change. And by the way, if you guys are looking to move here to Las Vegas or you're a current resident, I am a licensed real estate agent and mortgage lender, so I'll put a QR code up here and a link down below that you can use. So if you're looking to buy, sell, or rent anytime soon, I got a team on one side, the real estate side, a team on the mortgage side that can help you with both of those quickly. Now, here's what's interesting about this legislative session. So 2 years ago, Governor Lombardo vetoed 75 bills in 2023. Okay, that was a record back then. Now, this year, he vetoed 87 bills. So he broke his own record from 2 years ago, and he almost was not able to do that, to be able to veto those bills, because he's a Republican, but the two chambers we have, here we call them the Senate and the Assembly, those two chambers are majority Democrat. So Nevada is like the ultimate swing state, and it's been that way for decades. So what happened, you'll see in a lot of these things where he vetoed were things that, generally the Democrats mostly supported, but he vetoed and pushed it back. So since 1993, this government here has been mostly split. You can look and see between governor, a Senate, and the Assembly, there's usually some sort of split. It's rare that one party has all three. Now, the Republicans did have that for 2 years, and then we went back to split, and the Democrats had it for 4 years, but now we're back to split again. So the politics of this state are pretty interesting, to say the least. Now, recently, though, in the last presidential election, Clark County, that's where Las Vegas is, for the presidential voting, still went Democrat. It went 50.4% for Harris, but 47.8% for Trump. This is the most Republican that Clark County has been in well over 2 decades. So this shift that's taking place is unique. It is different to see going on here. Now, these two parties have battled a whole bunch in the state over the years. They've had lawsuits against each other, and, politics are oftentimes ugly. Things with redistricting the maps, the congressional maps, which happened in 2021 when the Democrats had the power in this state, and they redrew the boundaries to really favor them, and there wasn't really much Republicans could do about it at the time. Now, several years later, here we are in this win for Lombardo as a Republican. The Democrats were just almost able to get a supermajority in the legislature to override his veto. That's what I was saying earlier, where he was able to veto these bills, certain bills that were largely supported by Democrats, some bipartisan support, but oftentimes they're mostly Democrat. So with Lombardo being a Republican as the governor and the Senate and the Assembly being controlled by Democrats, the one way the Democrats were almost able to overrule everything Lombardo could have vetoed was if they had 2/3 of the representatives in the Senate and the Assembly. So the Assembly has 42 members in it across the entire state of Nevada. 2/3 of that would be 28, which is what the Democrats needed to have that supermajority. Well, the Democrats had 27. All right. When it comes to the Senate, there's 21 representatives in the Senate. 2/3 of that would have been 14 the Democrats needed to override a veto. The Democrats had 13 representatives. So just one more representative for the Democrats in those two chambers, and they would have been able to push back any veto Lombardo gave. So the Democrats wrote legislation. Lombardo said, hey, I'm going to veto this. The Democrats could have said, hey, well, tough luck, Governor. We got the majority numbers. We're going to override your veto. So the Republicans were just barely able to avoid that in the state of Nevada. Now, we've had a similar situation before in the past, actually, where it was interesting. This is when the Democrats had full control in Nevada, but the Republicans in the Senate had 8 representatives. So 21, right? So the Democrats needed 14 to have the supermajority, but they had 13. They had the majority in the Assembly, but not in the Senate. So the Republicans were just barely able to stop a tax increase from going into effect. So that's how close it is here in the state of Nevada. So let's look at some of the bills that were pushed, that were trying to get to the governor but never made it. So one was about tax credits for Hollywood 2.0 coming here, in the Summerlin area. That did not make it through. Red light cameras, that was one that has tried for years, numerous times that's been tried to put red light cameras at intersections here in the Vegas area, and the speed cameras and that sort of thing, and every single time it's been defeated because there's issues about the constitutionality of them, people's privacy, the accuracy of these cameras, and that sort of thing, whether or not they're just considered to be a revenue generator for government. So those are a lot of things that get pushed back on that. There's also a 2-year pilot program to reduce mortgage rates for first-time home buyers making up to $140,000. That did not make it to the governor either, but it's expected to be reintroduced at the next session. So with these new laws that did go into effect, okay, I'm only going to be able to cover so many here. One of them, cocktails to go, now allowed. I'm sure a lot of you are going to love to hear that. So counties may allow restaurants and food establishments to sell or deliver alcoholic drinks to go. So that's extending a policy that began during COVID. Fake cannabis shops banned, okay, or so it says, I'll use air quotes, banned. And the reason I'm doing that is because it says effective October 1, shops that sell hemp but portray themselves like cannabis dispensaries must post clear signs saying they are not licensed to sell cannabis and that their products are within legal THC limits. So the businesses can still operate. They just have to put a sign up that says, that gives this disclaimer. But I've seen at least one of the two on downtown Fremont Street that does have a sign up that says, I've put it in my content before. So I don't know how much it's really going to change. They're still allowed to operate. And with the sign they have to put up, who knows how big it even has to be. And who knows if, some tourist who's not familiar with this would actually even understand that. So we'll see how that one plays out. You get a free new driver's license if you're a victim of identity theft. Refund is required for unsuccessful rental applications. This was a big one I put out on my content that a lot of people commented on. So October 1st, landlords will have to refund application fees if the applicant doesn't end up renting the property. It also forbids charging extra online convenience fees beyond the actual processing cost. So it's saying landlords can no longer profit from application fees or from charging additional fees for online processing. So that was one that was a big one because there's lots of people who felt that landlords would essentially scam people by just saying, hey, we've got a unit for rent, and just accepting application fees from people and just turning them away, and they got to keep the money for it. So now there's people in real estate who obviously push back and don't like that because they say there's operational costs that go with doing this and that they're not getting rich off of these fees. But nonetheless, that is now the law in Nevada. No bounce houses if it's too windy. So, hopefully we won't see any more bounce houses flying around Clark County anymore on social media, or trampolines is what we see a lot of. So if the speeds of the wind are 15 miles or more per hour, cannot have bounce houses or can't use them. Diapers are now exempt from sales tax. Minimum wage changes for workers with disabilities. I just learned about this last year. So you used to be able to pay a lower than minimum wage for workers with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but that's transitioning out fully by January 2028. Construction can now begin earlier in the day during the summer. From April through September, construction crews can now begin work at 5 a.m. as long as it's 300 or more feet from residences. Landlords can no longer prohibit you from displaying religious signs, also known as the mezuzah law. So there are some restrictions about how large the religious display can be, but they can no longer, generally can no longer restrict as long as it's within those dimensions. Temporary guardianship for deported parents. So this allows deportation impacted families to pre-designate a temporary guardian for their children effective immediately. Anti-Semitism has been defined for discrimination cases. So there's legislation introduced, a legal definition of anti-Semitism for state investigations into housing, employment, and accommodations, prompting debate over free speech implications. Driving the wrong way will be a misdemeanor crime on October 1st. So previously, this was just a civil infraction, but now it's a misdemeanor. Releasing certain balloons into the air is now banned. Hot air balloons are still okay, but many other balloons, you can no longer release them into the air because there's been issues with them hitting power lines and causing outages. The Nevada legislature approved the Fruit Loop to be recognized as a historic landmark. So the Fruit Loop has been a term that I've heard locals use for years. That's to define area over like Paradise Road, known for having several gay clubs like Piranha, Quads, Free Zone. So that area there, right over on Paradise, right by Virgin Hotel and Casino near the airport, that's actually going to be designated now as a historical landmark called the Fruit Loop. Payments are now being offered to ranchers and farmers for water rights. This is to help conserve water used from Lake Mead because we've been making conservation efforts for over 20 years now in the area and still making more efforts to help control the amount of water supply that we use from Lake Mead. The Nevada law removes the statutory $500 minimum wager requirement on slot machines for the high roller private gaming rooms, or the salons, and allows casinos to set their own minimums with approval from the state gaming regulators. It also removes the requirement to include table games in these salons. If you don't stop for a school bus during drop-off and they have their sign, pick up and drop off, and they have their stop sign out, you can now get cited for that because school buses can now have cameras on them. So the cameras are on these school buses, so if you go around them, they're going to record it, and that footage can be reviewed by police, and they can determine whether or not you're going to be getting a citation for going around the school bus when the stop sign was out. Reba's Law. A lot of people people who are big animal lovers. This was a big one. So Reba's Law strengthens penalties for people convicted of animal cruelty. So this bill was introduced after a dog named Reba was found in a sealed container by a dumpster behind a grocery store last summer and eventually died. So that was the whole tragic incident that made the news. It was a big story here. So the bill was introduced, but it actually did not make progress initially. So that was one thing that happened that surprised people about the bill, because they thought it was going to wind up making good progress and ultimately become law. Well, what happened after it did not make progress was enough people put pressure on certain representatives to basically bring the bill back to life. They even made a change.org petition and called out two representatives. They said, hey, these are the two people responsible for this bill not making progress, and they named them, they put them on there by name and put pressure to get this bill reintroduced, is what they were able to do. I didn't even know you could do this, but they held a special session and they got a waiver to reintroduce the bill. I was not aware you could even do that. Now, this bill grants immunity from criminal and civil liability to a person who tries to remove an animal from an unattended locked car in extreme weather conditions such as heat or cold. Any person can use reasonable means necessary to protect the pet and to remove the pet from the car if it's locked and there's no other way to remove the animal, and they've reported the animal in the car to emergency services or animal control and requested their assistance. So in the past, it was basically like you just call 911 and just, wait for someone to show up. That's what it was. Now there's more protections for people who are trying to save the animal, given that they take some of these other steps, or that they at least look at some of these other steps. So it says the person should cooperate with the responding officials and has to stay with the pet in a safe place in close proximity to the motor vehicle until the official dismisses them according to the law. So there are more protections in place, but there are some aspects that if you are going to be breaking someone's window to save an animal, that they are expected to follow. This one, more so at the local level, but food vendors can now get one license for the city of Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, Henderson, and Clark County. So this came into effect, last year was a big story about food vendors needing to be licensed and that sort of thing from the health department, issues over sanitation and sinks and that sort of thing. So according to the Southern Nevada Health District, since licensing went into effect for street vendors 1 year ago, only 14 have successfully completed the process. So this was to help simplify it so that people could just get one license and be covered for and pretty much the entire Las Vegas metro area. Now we'll hop into all these bills that Governor Lombardo vetoed. I can't do all 87 of them, but I can group these together as best I can, and ones I think a lot of people will be impacted by. So here's what we had. Going down the list. So one of them was to change the word assemblyman and assemblywoman to just being assembly member. So vetoed that one, because I think he said there's already a process in place if they want to change that. Anything related to firearms restrictions was vetoed, was denied. There were numerous bills introduced to put restrictions on firearms, and he vetoed all of those. Establishing a Juneteenth Educational and Economic Commission. Denied that one because he said it was more of an issue over funding for it. And what's interesting is 2 years ago, in the previous session, he's the one who actually made Juneteenth a state holiday in 2023. But as far as this, Educational Economic Commission, he said no. Waiving college fees for qualifying homeless students, no. Prohibiting discrimination in health insurance policies, he said no, because we already have laws in place for that. So he felt it was really just more symbolic and wasn't a good use of time because we already have laws for that. Extending pre-execution timeline after judges order it from currently being 60 to 90 days to 120 to 180 days. That was vetoed. So it's still 60 to 90 days if a judge orders someone to be executed. Allowing child care facilities and HOAs, restricting ICE on school grounds, expanding collective bargaining in schools, privacy for abortion pill prescribers, and a proposal to expand the availability of mail ballot drop boxes during the period after early voting and before Election Day. One category of vetoes that were a lot of, I don't think I've ever seen this many before over the years here in Nevada, was lots of proclamations, like certain awareness months, recognizing certain holidays and things like that, wanting additional days of recognition. So there were quite a few. So one of them, these were all vetoed. All these were denied. Changing the date of Indigenous Peoples Day, making July Muslim American Heritage Month, making March Women Veterans History Month, designating October as Menopause Awareness Month, designating specific days to honor certain Hindu, Islamic, Sikh, and Buddhist holidays, Larry Itliong Day, who founded the Filipino Farm Labor Union, Dolores Huerta Day, co-founded the United Farm Workers Union. All these proclamations he said no to. Changing voter registration rules. This is a big one. I mean, we're talking elections here, right? So voting's always going to be a big topic. So this is one that the Democrats wanted, where they says it would have allowed tribal identifications and IDs from another state to be used as proof of identity when registering to vote in person here in Nevada during the early voting period. Lombardo cited language to allow people who cannot verify their residency to provide a written affirmation and cast a provisional ballot. They would then have until the Friday after Election Day to provide proof of identity and residency, which would ultimately have to be what makes their vote count. So with all of this that was proposed, he said no. Price fixing ban. So this would have made it illegal for an individual to intentionally raise the price of essential goods if the price increases don't adequately align with supply and demand. The reason this was denied is because he said this bill fails to recognize that prices reflect complex supply chain dynamics and market forces, not merely alleged predatory intent. So basically he's saying is like, okay, well, who comes up with, like, which government official is going to come up with the definition for saying something is, quote unquote, adequately aligned with supply and demand? So that's what he's saying. He basically just did not want to give the government too much power to dictate to businesses what their prices should be. Opting out of sex education. So this was an interesting one because the current law in Nevada says that sex education classes in schools are opt-in. So what it means right now is that schools want to teach sex education classes to kids. The kids have to go to their parents, and the parents have to give their permission to say, yes, I am going to allow my children to be able to, receive these sexual education classes. So the parents have to explicitly give permission right now. What the Democrats want to do is basically reverse that and say, we are going to teach everyone's kids sexual education, and now it's on the parents to say, no, I don't want you to do that. Now they have to the parents would have to tell the school, I want to opt my child out of these classes. So Governor Lombardo vetoed that because he felt it was taking too much control away from parents being able to decide what their kids do and don't learn, and to have those conversations, he said, that are difficult and very private home conversations for parents raising their kids. In a similar vein, there was another bill that was introduced that was wanting to grant immunity for librarians providing access to materials in good faith. Now, this goes back to actually part of the culture wars in recent years over kids being exposed to LGBTQ+ and diversity, equity, inclusion topics, which were a hot topic all across the country. Here in Nevada was no different. And Lombardo vetoed this because he said the bill fails to define what the term good faith means. So basically what he's saying is without a definition of good faith, they would create an unworkable legal standard. Those are the terms, the wording used in the article here. So it'd be an unworkable legal standard. And so he's saying if we don't have a definition of what good faith is, then how can we actually prove any of this? How can we actually justify this or enforce this without the definition of good faith? He vetoed that for the same reason as the sex education one, where he said he felt it would take power away from parents being in control of what their kids are exposed to. Another bill that got vetoed was about the treatment of transgender prisoners. So this would have adopted regulations for the supervision, custody, care, security, housing, medical and mental health treatment of transgender gender nonconforming, and gender non-binary offenders. And a voter ID bill was introduced that was basically a compromise to what's already in the works here in the state of Nevada. So back in 2024, so just 1 year ago, 73% of Nevada voters approved a ballot measure to require that people have to show ID when they vote in person, or if they're going to vote by mail, they have to provide the last 4 digits of their social security number or of their driver's license number. So they got enough signatures collected to get it on the ballot as a vote, and then Nevada voters strongly were in support of this. Now here's the thing. If this gets approved again in 2026, it has to get approved 2 elections in a row. So it got approved in 2024 with 73%. If it wins again in 2026, then it becomes part of the Nevada state constitution and it is law. So that's where it is. So next year in 2026, if the majority of Nevadans agree they want people to show ID when they vote, then this is going to become law. Now, what the Democrats wanted to do was they wanted the governor to sign this bill that said that they would begin voter ID next year. But what they wanted was more ballot drop boxes to be allowed. But unlike the ballot measure, this bill would have allowed the identity of a person voting by mail to be verified only with their signature, even if the identifying number cannot be immediately verified. So Lombardo vetoed this because he said he wholeheartedly supports voter ID, but he disagreed with the signature element of the bill, which he said allowed for looser guidelines for mail voters. So basically this bill with the Democrats was saying, okay, yes, people have to show ID when they vote in person, but they wanted to still just be able to use people's signature when they vote by mail, and they wanted to have more ballot drop boxes. So Lombardo vetoed and said no. So basically, Lombardo is banking on the idea, or he's optimistic that in 2026, Nevadans will vote again to approve voter ID, then it becomes law. Democrats are worried that's going to happen, which is why they why they gave this bill in hopes that Governor Lombardo would sign it and basically draw like a compromise between the ID of voting in person versus voting by mail. But he vetoed the whole thing. So next year in 2026, we'll ultimately determine whether or not that becomes Nevada law. So tell me what you guys think about all these new laws. It was a whole bunch to cover. I appreciate you guys sitting here and being here with me. Remember, QR code here, link down below if any of you are looking to move to Vegas or you need help. If you already live here, buying, selling, or renting, happy to help you with that process. Thanks for watching. I'm Jacob, and even with all the new laws, it's still my life in Vegas.